Doesn't every generation complain about the next one that's coming along? Is what we're seeing at the moment not just more old hat that's occurred for every generation previously?
Well, yes and no. Yes, every generation complains, and the complaints tend to be similar. And that's gone on not since the dawn of history. People always quote, Socrates or something, but really, that begins when you start getting modernity. You start getting each generation is changing, around the 16th, 17th century in Europe. So, yes, that's been going on a long time. But it's never before been the case that the mental health of the young generation suddenly was really different and really bad. So, the main argument I get against me is just the one you just said, that, oh, this is just another moral panic. There's nothing going on here. This is what always happens. No, this is not what always happens. You don't ever before get a doubling of the suicide rate of preteen girls. You don't ever get an across the board, across many nations, plummeting of mental health, all beginning right around 2012, 2013. So no, this time is really different.
What is it that children need to do in childhood? Like, we don't think about it that importantly. It's just the thing that you do before you get to puberty, where you start to become a person. But those experiences are very formative. What does a good childhood look like?
Yeah. Now, thanks for setting it up that way, because there's so much focus on the phones and social media. And I was focused on that too. But what I decided to do in writing this book and writing The Anxious Generation was, I'm not even going to talk about the phones and social media until I've taken readers through what is childhood, why do we have it, how is human childhood different from every other animal, including chimpanzees. And so, if you start just with mammals, all mammals have the same life plan, which is huge investment from the parents or the mother in the baby, long childhood, big brain. How do you wire up the brain? Play. Play is the thing. Your brain doesn't grow from nursing. Your brain grows from moving away from your mother, trying to climb something. Anyone who's had a puppy or a kitten knows they want to play all the time because they have to practice the skills to wire up the brain. So we have to let our kids wire up their brains. Now, humans are different because we have much bigger brains and we have culture. This is crucial. Other animals, they grow as, sort of fast as they can, and then they reproduce. Humans, we grow fast and then we slow down. At age 7 to 12, 13, we're not growing very fast. And it's thought that that period is a critical period for cultural learning. All the way through puberty, we're really trying to soak in, how do we do things around here? What do adults do? How do I approach the opposite sex or sexuality? So there's a lot of learning that has to happen. And the problem is, we've taken that learning period and we've said, instead of learning from grown-ups around you or even from, older kids in your neighborhood, how about if we just hook you up? Here's a phone or an iPad. We'll just hook you up and you can get socialized by random weirdos on the internet. We're selected by an algorithm for being really extreme. How about that? Well, that's kind of what we've done.
Yeah, I'm around kids more and more as my friends finally become less man children and actually become fathers themselves of actual children. And it's so interesting. Like my group of friends largely are pretty red-pilled on this, the concerns about exposure to technology. But, when you go for dinner at the sort of times that you do with guys that have got families, you end up going a little bit earlier, which means you're also around other families. And we go to these restaurants and I'll get to see, how other families that probably just aren't aware of this are anesthetizing a boisterous child. And a lot of the time at the table, it's the kid starts to act up, they're a little bit bored, and the parents are trying to have a conversation, or the adults at the table are trying to have a conversation, and one of them just goes, open up the phone, pass the phone. And the maddest thing that I've seen from sort of 2 to 3-year-old children is their ability to skip ads on YouTube. Like, they understand the difference between an advert and the button and how they can get past it. And I'm like, well, first off, look, if you're giving your kid this to anesthetize them, buy YouTube Premium. It's $10 a month and it'll change your life.
Gets rid of the ads, yeah.
But also this level of engagement with, the capitalist system of Facebook pixel tagging and all that stuff from 2 years old is crazy.
No, that's right. That's right. We're very protective of our kids. And if I said to people, how about if we have this thing that we have a special door, a special window, and we're going to put it on your child's crib, and advertisers and corporations can come and they can just communicate with your kid, and you have nothing to do with it. What do you think? Is that okay? Like, no, we would never let that happen. And then suppose when your daughter is 11, 12, 13, we'll put a special window on her bedroom, and strange men can come and they can talk to her through the window. They can look at her through the window. How about that? Would you do that? Like, no, of course you wouldn't do that. But that's kind of what we're doing. We're saying here, companies can have access to our kids and they can train them with the stimulus response paradigm. And strangers can have access to our children once they get a social media account. And they can try to convince them to meet up in the real world. They can try to sell them things, all kinds of stuff like that. Actually, I want to pick up, you used the word anesthetize, which is a very good word here, because as many people know, like 100, 150 years ago, there were a variety of medications for children, like that had opiates in them to calm the child and help them sleep. Or we'd give them alcohol. We didn't know that these things interfered with their development. And we all discovered as soon as we got our first iPhone. I mean, I have video, my son was born in 2006. And so many of our videos of me videotaping him end with him reaching for the phone and saying, iPhone, iPhone. Like he wants it, he needs it because it's so stimulating. Back then, in the early days of all this stuff, 2008 to 2012, we thought the technology was magical. And we thought, let's let our kids get stimulated by stimulation. Isn't that going to be good for their brain development? It seemed okay to do it. It'll give him a head start. He'll be, digital natives. He'll be comfortable with this technology. And besides, everyone else is doing it, so it must be okay. So we ended up anesthetizing him.
Let's back out of the technology thing. We're going to get onto that. But let's just talk about what has changed with regards to parenting styles outside of technology over the last few decades. How has this created the raw material foundation for the kids that would grow up?
No, that's a great question. It's one that I don't write enough about because I am focused on the technology. But Greg and I did write about this in the Coddling the American Mind, that there is a long-term transition over generations as when life is hard and families are big and religion is an important part of life, you tend to have a very structured, kids are growing up with a lot of structure. There are do's and don'ts. There are punishments if you misbehave. And there's a big liberal conservative split on this. In general, conservatives want more strict child rearing. Progressives want more lenient, liberal, and now called gentle parenting. And in general, as our societies have gotten wealthier and safer and our families get smaller, we've all kind of moved over to the gentle side. When I was a kid, spanking was normal, but it was only for the very, my sisters and I, we got spanked a few times when we did something really terrible. But now it's, at least in, educated circles, that's almost unheard of. Whereas a couple generations before, there would have been a lot more physical
Your school
punishment.
teacher would have.
Yes, that's right. Schools would hit the kids. That's right.
Yeah.
So, so in many ways it's progress. On the other hand, if you take out the threats, the punishments, all the negative stuff, and you kind of leave it with what you see a lot of parents doing, now, Johnny, was that a wise choice or an unwise choice? As opposed to saying, no, you do not hit your sister. Yeah. So I think we've become a little too gentle, too unstructured. And this might also help explain a really interesting twist in the data that it's not really in the book. I found a lot of it even afterwards, is that the mental health crisis is much worse for children in families on the left than on the right. So liberals or progressives have always had slightly higher levels of neuroticism, anxiety, depression, just a little bit more than conservatives. It's a big, long studied thing. Conservatives are a little bit happier than liberals, adults and children. And if you plot out the levels of happiness or the negative stuff like meaninglessness, on all the graphs in my book, you'll see you get a straight line until around 2011, 2012. And then all of a sudden, the lines go up like a hockey stick. Well, if you break it out by are you a liberal or conservative, which is asked on one or two surveys, it's the liberal kids, especially the liberal girls, they go up first and fastest. something happened, whatever it was that changed in the early 2010s, it hit liberal kids, especially liberal girls, the hardest. And I think part of it is what we're talking about. If you are rooted deeply in structure and community, and you have to go to church every Sunday, or you're an Orthodox Jewish kid, you've got Shabbat, you've got 24 hours where there are no devices and you're with your family. Moving to the digital technology didn't wash these kids out to sea. But if you're a more progressive family, usually a smaller family, more mobile, you move around more, perhaps, you have weaker ties, a lot of freedom, a lot of creativity, but those kids seem to be especially vulnerable to being washed away in the early 2010s. It's not just left, right. It's also religious conservative, religious or secular. So secular conservative kids show the least increase. Everybody goes up, but they show the least increase. Whereas progressive, non-religious kids or families, that's where you see the biggest increase in mental health problems.
I wonder what's happening to test scores with regards to students.
So there's a global measure of test scores around the world. That's PISA, the Program for International Something Assessment, Scholastic, I suppose. And with PISA, what we see is that scores were going up from the 90s. I think it started in the 90s. Scores were sort of going slowly up from the 90s to the 2012 assessment. It's every 3 years. And beginning at the 2012 assessment, some of them start to go down. And then they go down further in the most recent. And everybody points to that and says, oh, COVID. Wow, COVID was so terrible. And it was. It was terrible that we took kids out of school. It was terrible that we took kids who weren't in any danger and said, you don't get to go to school because what if you bring home the virus to an adult? And so it's true that COVID, being out of school did hurt test scores. But what people are only just beginning to realize, when you look at those graphs, it didn't start with COVID. It started when kids and everybody got on phones around 2012. In America, we have the NAEP, N-A-E-P, National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's called the Nation's Report Card. Same thing. There we have data back from the 70s. So we were making progress. Like kids literally, in fourth or eighth grade, whenever they measure it, kids literally were learning more about math, science, and better at reading. There was progress for decades, slow but steady progress until 2012. And then it begins to reverse. And yes, it reverses even more during COVID, but the reversal started around 2012. So I think the main thing we should be focusing on here is phones in schools. We'll talk more about what phones are doing to all of us, but the idea that a child has access, like a seventh grader has a smartphone in their pocket, they're going to text. If the phone is available, someone is texting. And if someone is texting or group texting or posting on Instagram, then everyone has to be checking. Otherwise, at lunch, they're going to be the one who doesn't know the thing that happened during third period. So once kids, around 2012 is when we get the phone-based childhood. That's roughly when teens switch from flip phones to smartphones, right around then. As soon as that happens, they're not paying as much attention in school. They're not learning enough. They're not learning as much as they did. They're not paying as much attention to each other, and they start getting lonelier. So after 2012, our kids are getting stupider and lonelier. And I think a lot of it, not all, but a lot of it is because of the phone.
Super lame. All right. What are the primary harms of technology on kids?
So once you see that kids have to grow up in a physical world, we evolved outdoors, nature, animals, people. When kids grow up on screens, so it's not just about social media. When you grow up with what I'm calling a phone-based childhood, where you're spending, the latest data I think is 9 hours a day average for American kids, 11 hours. Freya just said there's a British study, it was like 10 or 11 hours a day for British kids on their phones, which includes tablets, I think, and video games, I think. In any case, it doesn't include homework or schoolwork, just recreational time, 9 to 11 hours a day. That pushes out everything else. And so what I say in the book is that there are 4 foundational harms. Once you see that it's taken up 10 hours a day, pushing everything else out, what matters? The most important thing is time with other kids, time with friends. That's crucial. I mean, all of your in person. That's right, in person. And we'll talk about whether virtual is good. It is not. But time actually with other kids, with your friends, and that has plummeted since 2012. It was dropping before in the earlier internet age, but boy, it really speeds up in the smartphone social media age. And so kids, the most nutritious thing your kid can do is be out playing with other kids. And this is even true for teenagers, hanging out with no adults telling them what to do. So that's crucial. That's really nutritious, as it were. Now, if kids, you might say, well, but they're spending of this 10, 11 hours, a lot of it is spent virtually interacting, like on video games. Well, let's look at multiplayer video games. Now, those are at least synchronous. Synchronous is good. You're talking, so that's actually a good thing. The girls on social media, it's asynchronous. I comment, I wait anxiously for you to comment on my comment. And so we're not really connecting. We're actually performing and we're anxious. Video games are at least synchronous, but you tell me, I was never a gamer. It seems to me that
you look at me and just
you
think,
look like
that's
a gamer. You're
guy
a tough
that
guy.
wasted a lot of hours playing video games.
Am I wrong?
I wasted a lot of hours playing video games. Your perception
Okay,
is
there
correct.
you go. Stereotypes sometimes have a basis in reality. So, look, basically, you're a healthy male. That means you almost certainly were playing video games. I mean, that's just the way it's been since the 90s. But you tell me, in video games, do you ever get in fights? Like you get mad at each other because someone broke a rule?
Of course.
Oh, how does that happen? Because I assume that the game itself regulates all the interactions. How
you mean like
cheat?
Fights in game, right? No. I mean, you just have disagreements. You have disagreements. You shout and you say that was totally stupid. Like, it's more.
Oh yeah, fine. No, but what I mean is, like, think about when you and your friends played a pickup soccer game or baseball game or whatever when you're kids, and someone says, "No, it was out of bounds." No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. No, it wasn't.
Okay,
like,
yes,
you argue about it.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is the arguments are really nutritious. The arguments. Jean Piaget, the great developmental psychologist, really talked a lot about this. When kids play marbles, they get in all kinds of disputes, and that's crucial. They learn how to work it out. So you tell me, when you're playing video games in an average day, 4 hours of video game playing, do you get in those kind of fights about, yes, it was, no, it wasn't, yes, it was, no, it wasn't?
Well,
or is
no,
everything
because
resolved?
the game mandates the rule set for you.
Exactly.
There is
That's
no
right.
mediating needed.
That's right. There you go. So it's just like if I said, we're going to replace all your kids' food with rice, white rice. And then someone said, yeah, that should be just as good. I mean, it's got just the same number of calories. You might say, yeah, but it's missing all the other nutrients. And that's what we do when we put boys on video games. Yeah, it's social. It's great fun. It has some benefits. It gives them some social calories. They're talking, but it's missing a lot of the nutrients that you get from face-to-face interaction.
Okay. Face-to-face interaction, that gets squeezed.
That's one. And that's just one. I'll go faster on the rest of them. Number 2, sleep deprivation. When kids have a screen in their room, again, these things are designed to be addictive. And when you let your kids spend hours with a device designed to be addictive, sometimes they get addicted. And so the kids who have dependency, they're going to take their phone into bed with them under the covers. Mom can't see that the light is still on because it's under the covers. So social media in particular and browsing the internet takes away a lot of sleep. And if you take away sleep from teenagers who are already not getting enough, they're going to be crankier, less healthy. They're going to gain weight. There's all kinds of things that happen physiologically and emotionally, which exacerbate the mental illness epidemic. So that's 2, the loss of sleep. The third is attention fragmentation. One of the main things kids need to do as teens, your brain is rewiring throughout childhood. Your brain is sort of pretty big by the time you're 5 or 6. And then a lot of it's just the rewiring, the myelination of circuits. In your teen years, the frontal cortex myelinates, the prefrontal cortex especially, is the seat of executive control. Can you set a goal, keep your eye on the goal, do the things necessary to reach the goal, even though there are distractions? And as adults, we've all learned to do that to some degree. But crucially in that learning was those teen years when the frontal cortex is really laying down, like, how do you do this? And instead, what we do is it's like we put little distractors. If a lot of the kids are getting interrupted every couple of minutes for their whole life, they never even spend 10 minutes without an interruption. This appears to interfere with their development of executive function. So we're creating young people who, when they come to the office, they can't just pay attention to something. They need more stimulation, and then they don't pay full attention. So attention fragmentation is devastating to their ability to be productive and creative. And then the 4th foundational harm is addiction. I get in big arguments with this with some of the researchers who study video games, who think video games are good. And they point out, most boys are having a great time and there's no sign of problem. Well, and that's true. That's true. Most boys who play video games, I can't say that they're damaged by it, but 5 or 10% are. The ones who develop problematic gaming, who are have compulsive use, when they're not playing, they become surly. Their brain is deficient in dopamine. They are addicted. They have a dependency. If you're going through your puberty years as a boy, getting this incredible amount of fixed stimulation, from Fortnite or whatever game you're playing, this is in addition to messing up your life. You're not spending time with friends. You're not learning how to talk to girls, whatever it is. This is likely to have some very lasting, possibly permanent effect. So those are the 4 foundational harms. They affect boys and girls on social media, not so much video games. And then there's all the specific harms that affect boys and girls. We can get into those. But if all you knew was, here's this consumer product, it's going to take your kid away from his friends. It's going to deprive him of sleep. It's going to fragment his ability to focus. And it's going to addict him. What do you say? Do you want this for your kid? Like, who would ever say yes?
Sure. All right. Yeah. So, there's been a lot of talk recently. I've got Daniel Cox coming on, the guy that did that really fantastic study about young boys breaking to the right and young girls breaking to the left. I've got him coming on soon. Yeah. But we're seeing a lot of sexed differences in worldview, in belief, in mental health. What mental health is declining, but the ways that it's declining, the sort of usages of technology. So talk to me about the sexed differences in technology. How do boys and girls use technology differently?
Sure. Yeah. So the master variable here, I believe, is a set of motivations that we've talked about in psychology for 50 years called agency and communion. So everybody has needs for agency, to be an agent, to make things happen. A child knocks over a block tower. It's thrilling. I did that. I caused that to fall. So that's agency. And then communion is connection, being part of a group, being welcomed and embraced and connecting. So everyone has both motives. But on average, boys have stronger agency motives. And when you let boys and girls choose what to do, the boys are going to gravitate more towards games that allow agency. And so fake war is one of the best examples. They want to practice their skills. Boys, I think, are evolutionarily programmed for hunting and war, to enjoy hunting and war. I found this out when I was 29 years old and for the first time in my life played paintball with my buddies. And hunting each other, we were mixed in with other people, but hunting each other in small groups and shooting guns to try to hit each other was the most thrilling thing we'd ever done.
That'll get you. Yeah.
So that was really cool. Like, wow, there's like a room in my heart for being a hunter and a warrior. Like, I didn't really know it was there, but it was. So anyway, boys choose to pursue agency motives. Girls choose to pursue more communion motives. They talk more with each other. As Richard Reeves, this wonderful British man who has this, who's been making the case for boys. Have you had Richard on the show?
Of course, yeah, he's great.
Of
he's
course,
coming back on again soon. Yeah, his new initiative, that the Center for Boys and Men,
American Institute for Boys and Men. Yeah,
thank you. That sounds awesome. I'm fully Richard Reeves pilled. I'm on board with all the stuff he's doing.
Me too.
Yeah.
We're all Richard Reeves pilled. Yes.
Yeah.
So Richard points out, girls like to do things face to face. Boys like to do things shoulder to shoulder. Like we're next to each other, but we're doing something.
I need to bring this up. So in Robin Dunbar's book, Friends, which came out maybe 18 months ago, he's got this phenomenal study. So the next time that you're at a party, look at the angle of the feet that women have when they talk to each other, and look at the angle of the feet that men have.
Like what? What do you mean? What do you see?
Women will talk perpendicular, 180 degrees. They'll be pretty much straight on like this.
Oh.
Men talk at about 120 degrees.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So they blade.
Perfect.
And the reason being that this is a bit of sort of evolutionary bro psychology coming in, but I think it's true. If even try it, you can try it the next time that you're at a party. Just, you'll be stood sort of like this with a guy, just blading on. And just turn yourself so that you're actually straight onto them. And there's this just it rises up inside of you, because really the only time that two guys would do that is if they were going to fight or they were going to kiss. And if you don't intend on doing either of those things, and you just feel, you're like, this feels right. There's something about that angle. It's like two north poles of a magnet.
Right. Yes. Oh, good example.
Divot away.
They don't want to. Yeah.
And, dude, look at it. 120 degrees for men, 180 degrees for women. You can't not see it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's so
good.
interesting.
I will look for that. And actually, this could suggest a really cool difference between real and virtual. You know, virtual interactions are not embodied. Like we can see, we can see each other's upper bodies here, but I think what we would find, because I don't at all feel freaked out by your
Being
face onto
straight
me
on.
on my,
Yep.
but I don't at all feel like, oh, we've either got to kiss or fight, like because we're virtual.
Well,
But,
we wait until we finish.
Well, yeah, you are pretty handsome, I must say. So again, something, we are embodied creatures. We're physical creatures. We're animals. We evolved outdoors. We had fights. We had hunts. We're physical creatures. And when we interact now virtually, we have only it's like the white rice thing. We have just like a little few of the nutrients, but we're missing most of them. So anyway, on to boys and girls. Sorry, I'm taking too long on this, but the point is, when laptops and then especially smartphones come out, all the kids love them, all the kids gravitate, all the kids are on them. The boys head straight for video games and YouTube. The boys are spending more time on video games and YouTube and porn. The girls go straight for the visual social media platforms, especially Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest in the early days. And so what are the effects? The girls are now on these platforms that are all about, I post a picture of me and my life, and then I wait for strangers to comment on it. And that's really, really bad for mental health. And that, I think, is why the girls, as soon as we hit 2012, 2013, the girls have very sharp elbows in the graphs, very hockey stick lines in the graphs. Boys, on the other hand, they're playing video games especially. Video games aren't making them depressed. Now, the boys are getting more depressed and anxious. They are roughly twice as depressed and anxious as they used to be, but it's more gradual. It starts a little sooner. It starts more like 2009, 2010, and it's more gradual. So I think what's happening, and what Zach Roush and I concluded in the book, and here we drew on Richard Reeves, is, for girls, boom, they get on social media, they get depressed. For boys, they've been withdrawing from the real world since the 70s and 80s. It used to be a male world. There used to be a patriarchy, but boy, has it been dismantled. And as everything shifts towards girls, and as schools get more and more structured towards girls and girls' needs and girls' ways of learning, and as we all freak out about gender gaps and we think that it's the girls we have to help in the 90s, which wasn't true. Girls had already passed boys. Boys are finding that they don't do well in school. They don't like school. But man, these video games are just getting better and better. And it's hard to approach a girl, but man, the pornography is getting better and better. And now you've got AI girlfriends, and soon AI girlfriends will be put into incredibly sexy robots. So what we're seeing is the progressive withdrawal of boys from effort in the real world that will pay off in the long run. And instead, boys' prodigious energy and their desires are being directed into a virtual world that generates nothing, absolutely nothing of any value in the real world.
Talking about boys and what's happening with them, there's so much conversation around young teen girl mental health. Give me the latest data. What are you seeing? What's happening with the young girls?
Sure. So, I mean, Freya covered this beautifully, and she writes about this beautifully on her Substack, Girls. But sort of the big picture here is, let's start with the mental health, but there's a lot more going on. With the mental health, it's very specific for girls. It's what are called internalizing disorders. It's especially depression and anxiety. Other things are up, but like, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, they're all up a little bit, but it's really depression and anxiety. Girls have suffer more from what are called internalizing disorders. So if there's stresses and problems, they kind of turn it inwards and they suffer anxiety, depression. Boys historically suffer more from what are called externalizing disorders. When there are problems with their development, they act out. They make other people miserable. Crime, deviance, violence. So that's historically the way girls and boys were. But what's happened is actually both girls and boys have moved more in the direction of internalizing disorders, but girls especially. So the numbers are hard to believe, but they're up around 30 or 40% of girls, teenage girls, would qualify as having depression or anxiety disorders. It used to be more like 10 or 15%. So it's now a normal thing to be an American or British teenage girl. It's just a normal thing that you think about suicide and you have your anxiety and you manage your anxiety. It's part of your identity. It's part of, it's with you all the time. So it's tragic. It's so sad, you know. It used to be the case that middle-aged people were the least happy. It's a well-known thing called the U-shaped curve of happiness. The happiest people used to be young adults, you know, teenagers and young adults, and then people in their 60s and 70s. They're done with the hard work, they get to enjoy their lives. But there's always people in the middle, you know, taking care of kids and parents. That's not true anymore. In Western countries, the young people have plunged, and especially the girls. So we have a graph in the book, Canadian data. Young Canadian women used to be the happiest. Now they're by far the least happy group of people in Canada. So for girls, the mental health, the anxiety, depression, that's like the central finding. But there's a lot more. Your question about that?
Go on.
Okay. So, you know, so much of the debate is just about the mental health data. But there's so much else that's warping girls' development and making them less happy. The hypersexualization, the pornification of everything, the fact that you've got these young girls on Instagram aping these millennial women with gigantic boobs and butts and fillers and all kinds of things, this is just really, really bad for them. So even if they don't get depressed and anxious, and they do, but even if they didn't, the fact that oh my God, the number of girls now, middle school girls, who are using skincare products and who are concerned about their skin, and doing makeup tutorials, like, no, your skin is perfect. Go have fun. Yes, you'll care about how you look. Girls have always cared about how they look. That's part of life. It's for boys too. But to take these, wonderful, sprightly, funny, fifth, sixth grade girls, and then suddenly to have them focus so much on their face and their beauty because they're on social media is a tragic loss of girlhood. There's that. There's the exposure to older men, creepy men who want to watch them dance, who want to talk with them.
You have an evolutionary background. You titled the book The Anxious Generation. Of all of the litany of different human emotions that we have, anxiety is the one that's very prevalent. We're hearing about anxiety disorders and things that are downstream from it. There's even a disorder now where people can't distinguish between anxiety and depression. And it means that then, I literally learned it yesterday from David Brooks. God damn it. Anyway, they struggle to work out the difference between anxiety and depression. So it's bleeding into.
Wow.
First off, from an evolutionary perspective, I think it's a bit of a cope by people with my intellectual interest background of EP to say, well, we're built to be vigilant. We've got the smoke detector principle. We're blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah. But it's really tuned up now. It's not just tuned up. It's like supercharged. And okay, my question being, why anxiety? What is it about the soup, the cocktail of stimulus that we have at the moment that's causing anxiety to be the predominant outcome?
Yeah. So I think it's there are many contributing factors, but two big ones. One is the loss of thrilling play in childhood, which we talked about. If kids don't get to take risks, they don't learn to manage risks, and then any little thing seems threatening. This is why students were suddenly asking for trigger warnings, in part because the idea that a book that describes a Greek myth in which Zeus rapes a woman, can we expect young women to just have to read this? So one is just exposure. If kids don't have exposure when they're young and they don't have thrills and they don't have risk, then any little thing is going to be much harder for them when they're older. That's one piece. The other is growing up on the stage. When you're growing up, you make a lot of mistakes. You say something stupid to your friend, and then your friend might criticize you. Your friend might even get angry at you, and then you make up. But when that happens on the stage, you say something, and before you know it, everyone is talking about it, and they're adding on their own comments, and you're the butt of the joke. And as anyone ever knows who's been through any kind of a cancellation attempt or any kind of public online thing, it's painful in a way beyond anything that we know in terms of physical suffering. It really makes people want to disappear, and it is a spur to suicide. So when the entire school is laughing at you, or the photo you sent of your genitals, or the thing you said that somebody caught and then added so kids should not grow up on a stage. The British, I'm told, have a saying, "Don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington." Is this something you've ever heard?
No.
Okay, older British people. I believe it's a Noel Coward song from like 100 years ago. But don't put your daughter on the stage, Mrs. Worthington, is good advice, especially for girls. And girls are much more anxious than boys. So if a girl grows up, everything she says can be amplified. Every image of her is commented on. She never develops just the basic security to move from minute to minute and hour to hour and person to person, because anything could blow up at any time. People are always judging you. So we have to give kids a normal human childhood if we expect them to develop normal human strengths.
Okay, so we've spoken about both. I wonder